Hey,
Hey, hi Scott, welcome.
hi. How are you? Sorry that everything went a little later, but
Yeah, there were some people already waiting. First of all, this is the first Q&A session of the conference. So we're going to have until people will get familiar with the setup, with the app. We're not always managing to keep things according to the schedule. Some people are still joining. So as a quick introduction, my name is Adrian Pica. I'm also working in product management. Thanks for the previous presentation. Thanks for taking the time to do this Q&A session. The way that we were gonna operate is I'm asking everyone in the audience to please use the chat to ask some questions, and we're going to use those. In the meantime, we can just talk a bit about the stuff that you presented. Congratulations on the book. I was curious when you were talking about the middle, in terms of like the product development stages, where would you say that this middle kind of like begins and well, where kind of it ends? In terms of, like prototyping, problem to solution fit, product to market fit, launch, and so on. Where would you see that middle that you are referring to?
yeah, Adrian, I mean, listen, I think the middle really refers to great volatility. And so there are periods of times where the volatility is less. And, in the beginning, when no one even knows what you're working on and you have no customers giving you a hard time and you have there's a honeymoon period in the beginning of a product where you're not in the middle yet. And then of course at the end, are you ever really done? But there are periods of time where you're coasting a little bit. And also, of course, if you sell the company or shut it down, that's certainly an end as well. But of course, the part of the reason I called it the messy middle is because I actually do believe we're always in a messy middle of some kind, unless we're fooling ourselves.
Right. So just a reminder to everyone watching, if you guys have any questions for Scott, please use the chat, as in here, and ask some questions. In the meantime, we're going to continue. You were mentioning the first principle being around like laziness, vanity, and people being selfish, and kind of keeping that in mind so you can drive the product features and product engagement around those areas. Explain to us a bit more about the thought process behind it and the implications from like a business perspective.
Yeah, well, I think just as an example, we'll talk about a trend that I'm really interested in, and I know many of the folks at the conference are building enterprise products, tools for big companies to use. And I think a lot about the consumerization of enterprise these days. How do you stop thinking about just selling a solution to a company that everyone is forced to use, as bad as it may be? And how do you start thinking about the people within an enterprise as people who have phones and apps and desire to have simplicity and speed and efficiency in their lives, and what do those folks want to do differently these days? Well, they want to first of all feel good about. Of course, they're humans, and so how do you start thinking? How do you evolve the enterprise tools? I mean, even things like procurement. If you work with a vendor at a company and you need to get that paid, what's the most elegant way of doing that? That is almost like ordering an Uber car, and when you start to really go down that path, you realize that you can build 10x better enterprise products than what are out there in the market by just making them more human. Taking those three things into account, the fact that people are kind of lazy and they are selfish in the early stages of using a new product, and they just want to look good and get credit from their boss. They want to, there's a procurement company that I work with as an advisor. They realized that if they just let their enterprise users download something as an Excel spreadsheet with all this great formatting, that when they share that Excel spreadsheet with other people in the company, they get credit for coming up with this amazing format. And it's like, well, great, that's a good example. So I think that's just one lens that I think about some of this through.
So when you talk about this, it kind of fits into stuff that I have observed in the way companies build products. We've had the build it and they will come, like technology driven, very waterfall, Microsoft type of approach. We're going to have a product next year. And then there was this whole like marketing driven approach with the app stores, and everything was related into getting people to try our app and so on. And we're slowly moving towards this like behavioral and psychological driven products, where like Nir Eyal probably pioneered with his book, The Hook, kind of like how can we look at building products in a different way, trying to understand humans better, and therefore building the products and the features that will make them use them more. And it was very, very interesting what you said, looking at crossing the chasm, that you need to reinvent yourself every time you go from one stage to the other. If you could give us some details on that, because I think this is one of the things that a lot of people, that founders and people involved into building products, fail to remember, that you need to constantly reinvent your product because you're moving to another group of the market.
I exactly right. And it's interesting. I mean, well, first of all, I would say that I'll invert the point a little bit and say that there are different types of customers we want at different stages of the journey of our product. The first set of customers that you want are the very partnering ones, like the ones that are not only forgiving of you, but also want to feel like they're owners. And it's interesting, like I think the unsung heroes of a lot of great products out there are these early customers that became almost like extended members of the team. Like every enterprise company I know has a few of these customers. They didn't even have equity. They just, for whatever reason, felt so passionately about the product and the problem that they would just, partner with the team building it and become their greatest advocate. And if you ask any big, enterprise founder, they'll say, oh yeah, it was Judy in the accounting department. She spent endless hours with us, on what the product should be. So you have to find some of those folks, but then later on, it's not about those people anymore. In fact, if you keep feeding those people's needs, then you will fail to build a product that scales. And so, it goes then to just people that are a bit more forgiving, and then eventually people that are not forgiving, but viral. Like you don't want the customers that will tell everyone about your product until you're ready for them. And what a lot of founders do that's a mistake is right at their launch, they'll just try to get all the customers they possibly can. And then they end up getting customers that have a bad experience, who are the viral customers. And suddenly they're spreading a bad message as opposed to a good message. So I really like this idea of, I love extended private betas for teams for a long time. If you can have 1,000 people actively using your product, to me, that's much more impressive as an investor than 100,000 people that are, sort of sporadically using your product.
Got it. All right, we have two questions now. One from Lucian. How does the messy middle change when you switch from smaller new market companies to large enterprises? Is the messy middle the same for product people working inside large organizations?
100%. Yeah, I mean, I think that I feel like I'm in the messy middle all the time, and I work within a big company now, and I certainly remember my days as a founder, and in the teams that I work with now that are in their early stages. Of course, the challenges are different. If talk about when you're trying to change something within a big company, you face a lot of the same headwinds, a lot of the same challenges when it comes to not being measured with the wrong measures. Startups struggle sometimes because they go for years without making any revenue, without being known, without having any relevance. And it's really hard to work in that period of uncertainty and anonymity. In a big company, a new initiative, 6 months later, the CEO comes in and is like, how much money are you making for me? And we're like, well, none. And then it's like, well, then why are we paying for all these people? and then maybe he or she will forget about you, and then 6 months later they'll come back and say, what are you doing again? Like, and it's really, that's hard. It's hard to exist within a large company building something new. And that's why I like to say that strategy is ultimately nourished by patience. And one of the greatest competitive advantages of the best teams that I've come across is simply sticking together long enough to figure it out, and being allowed to stick together long enough to figure it out within a big company.
Yeah, I think when it comes to those like corporate plays, being allowed, even if that means just having enough resources to build that, that's very important, and that's another part of product management, to make sure that you align your stakeholders. All right.
Adrian, one thing I would just say is one trick we use with my teams at Adobe now is we really try to agree up front, like, what are the measures of our success of this initiative? Like, let's just be very clear. Are we measuring revenue? Are we measuring monthly active users? Are we measuring growth? Like, because that's how you make sure that things survive over the long term, is you have to almost define up front and agree upon, like, what are we going to measure ourselves by?
So we have a question from Sabina that we're going to come back, but we're going to Mihai's questions because it kind of ties into what we were just saying. Like, how do you filter the features asked by first your customers? Basically, this is about prioritization and what you just mentioned, like how you define those KPIs and you prioritize accordingly.
Yeah, so when it comes to feature requests from customers and how do you prioritize all of them? I mean, certainly you want to gather all of that information. You also want to independently develop what your North Star is as a company, as a product. Like, what are you ultimately trying to do? What is your conviction about how the world should be in your industry that you're driving towards? And it's important then to prioritize the requests and the other things you need to do that will bring you closer to that flag that you've planted. And then it's a lot of these other things that people are requesting. I mean, here's one controversial thing I'll say, which is you want to optimize in a product journey for the problems you want to have, not the problems you don't want to have. And so if customers are coming to you and saying, oh my gosh, I love your product so much, but if you could only do this, 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 and this, those are actually problems you want to have. And so keeping those as problems is fine. But when customers come to you and say, I cannot use your product because of this, I cannot use your product because of that, those are problems you don't want to have, because that's just limiting people engaging and falling in love with your product. And so those are the things you have to prioritize first. And so what I always like to tell teams is, look at your roadmap, and everything that is a good sign that people are using your product that they want to have, just don't do those things. Not for now. Like, do them later on. Like, instead, focus on the things that are prohibiting people from finding value in your product.
Got it. We are a bit over time with the overall schedule, but we started a bit later. So let's assume that we have like 1-2 more minutes left, and we have the question from Sabina, which is related to probably starting a company, having a product in the very early stages. She says, when it comes to a startup, you are self-reliant at the beginning of the road. How do you move forward to begin and be reliant on others? Probably expanding the team. She says, I know it can be hard learning to let go and trust others. I was wondering if you have tips and tricks on team building, company building.
Well, it's a great question, because very, very smart people have failed in their businesses because they have failed to scale themselves. And the question that you have to always ask yourself, everything you're doing every day, is this something that only I can do? Or is this something that someone else can do? And if it's something someone else can do, you have to find someone else to do it. I mean, there's too much that only a founder can and should do in her early days, that, you just have to scale yourself in that way. And that being said, the things that are your superpower that you can do better than anyone else in the world, like, you should do. I mean, that's why I encourage a lot of product-oriented founders. Don't hire a product manager in the early days. Like, you are the product manager. But everything else you're doing, like, get someone else to do it. And so it's an important thing to think about. But And then also, there's some things that you will assume you can still do better. And so you'll want to do them. Just have someone else, on some of those things, like challenge yourself, test yourself by asking someone to do something for a couple of weeks and see whether, if they did it 95% the way you would have done it, just let them do it. Because again, you need to focus on those things that only you can do.
All right, Scott, thank you so much for your input. The book is available on your website and on Amazon. Everyone watching, don't hesitate to go and check it out. Thanks again for your time.
Have a good one.
Bye. Bye, everyone.